The rain fell on Berlin not as a blessing, but as a punishment. It was a fine, icy rain, the kind that seeps into your bones, transforming the simple act of walking into a battle against the elements. For Aya, each drop was a reminder of her loneliness. Cornered under the narrow awning of a closed shop, she clutched her thin coat to her chest, barely protecting her from the cold. Her amber eyes, marked by a painful wisdom, followed the rhythm of the windshield wipers of passing cars, distant shadows of a normal life that seemed unattainable. In her bag, like a treasure and a burden, lay her resume. A resume that told only half a story. It spoke of her fluency in 3 languages, of her administrative experience in Tripoli, but remained silent about the chaos of war, about the desperate escape, about the face of her husband, lost to the violence that engulfed their city. She remained silent about Malik, her 5-year-old son, who now waited in the small, damp room of a refugee shelter, confident that his mother would bring good news, perhaps even some chocolate. Aya's heart tightened, a physical pang of love and deep anxiety. Tomorrow's interview was more than an opportunity. It was a thread of hope, as tenuous as a spider's web. It was for an administrative assistant position, at a large German conglomerate. She had researched the company, its founder, a man named Klaus Richter. A name that sounded like a fortress, solid and impenetrable. She mentally repeated the phrases in German, trying to tame the accent that betrayed her origins. The wind howled, cutting, and she shrank even further. An elderly woman, bundled up in a thick woolen coat, hurried past her, casting a quick, almost disdainful glance. Aya looked away, feeling the heat of embarrassment on her face. She wasn't a beggar. She was a professional, a mother, a survivor. But that night, under the relentless rain, identities blurred, and the most visible was that of a foreigner, an intruder. She gathered her strength, the strength that had kept her alive across the Mediterranean in a precarious boat, and decided to run to the bus stop. Her shoes, already wet, made a sucking sound with each step on the soaked pavement. The city glistened, reflected in thousands of puddles, but for Aya, Berlin was a labyrinth of shadows and closed doors. She reached the shelter, a gray building that smelled of disinfectant and resigned despair. Opening the door to her room, a cubicle with 2 beds and a sink, she saw Malik sleeping soundly, his curly hair spread across the pillow. His innocence at that moment was a stab of sweet agony. She knelt beside the bed, whispered a prayer in Arabic, an ancient plea for a better tomorrow. Tomorrow. Everything depended on tomorrow. As she drifted off to sleep, the sound of the rain hitting the window mingled with the memory of her son's smile, creating a strange symphony of fear and hope. She didn't know that the storm raging outside was merely the prelude to a much greater gale about to enter her life, a gale with the stern face and piercing eyes of a powerful man. The morning sun was a well-intentioned lie. Light streamed through the small window of the room, illuminating the dust dancing in the air, but it couldn't dispel the cold that had settled on the walls. Aya, dressed in her only professional outfit, a black pantsuit, simple but impeccably clean and pressed. It was her armor. As she ran her hand along the collar of her blouse, she felt the rough texture of her fingers, marked by temporary cleaning jobs. Malik, sitting on the bed, watched her with serious eyes. "Are you going to get the job, Mom?" he asked, his voice a glimmer of optimism. "I will, my love. With God's help," Aya replied, kissing his forehead. The knot in her stomach was so tight, she could barely swallow the piece of bread that was her breakfast. The bus ride to the financial district was a blur of nervousness. She observed the other passengers, men in expensive suits talking loudly on their cell phones, confident-looking women reading reports. They belonged to that world. She was merely a visitor, a spectator trying to break through the bubble. The Richter Holdings building was a giant of glass and steel, reflecting the cloudy sky with an intimidating coldness. The sliding glass doors opened with a silent whisper, and Aya entered a lobby that resembled a centuries-old cathedral. The floor was of marble so polished that she could see her own reflection, small and frightened. The air smelled of expensive coffee and subtle perfume. The receptionist, a young and perfectly groomed woman, stared at her with barely disguised curiosity. "Aya Al-Mansuri. I have an interview with Mr. Richter at 10 o'clock, said Aya, trying to project a confidence she didn't feel. The receptionist consulted her screen. "Yes. The 22nd floor. Mr. Richter's secretary will receive you. The elevator ride was silent and quick, a smooth ascent that left her ears plugged. On the 22nd floor, another woman, older and with a gentler look, greeted her. Mrs. Al-Mansouri? Mr. Richter is ready to receive you. You may enter. Aya swallowed hard. Her heart pounded so hard she feared everyone could hear it. The office door was made of solid, dark, imposing wood. She touched it lightly, and a deep voice from inside authorized her to enter. The office was vast, with a panoramic view overlooking the city. And, seated behind a desk that looked like an island of ebony, was Klaus Richter. He was older than in the photographs, his gray hair cut with military precision, his shoulders broad. But what impressed Aya most were his eyes. They were a light blue, almost pale, and seemed to analyze everything, to dismantle every detail, every weakness. He didn't smile. He merely gestured to the chair opposite the desk. Sit down, Mrs. Al-Mansouri. Aya sat down, with the upright posture of someone taught to show respect. The interview began in a standard way. He asked questions about her resume, and she answered, her voice a little shaky at first, but gaining firmness as she spoke of her previous work. He was direct, incisive. Why did you leave Libya? He asked suddenly, his eyes fixed on her like two headlights. Aya felt a chill. The situation became unstable, she replied, choosing her words carefully. The war. He insisted. She nodded, unable to speak. He observed her for a long moment, and Aya felt like an insect under a magnifying glass. He wasn't just assessing her professional skills, he was assessing her pain, her story. And then, something unexpected happened. His eyes softened, almost imperceptibly. It's very difficult to start over in a foreign country, he said, his voice a little less harsh. Especially alone. The interview continued, but the tone had changed. Klaus Richter asked some more technical questions, but Aya had the strange feeling that the real assessment had already taken place. As she stood to leave, he extended his hand for a handshake. His hand was large, the skin rough, the pressure firm. Thank you for your time, Ms. Al-Mansouri. We will be in touch. Aya left the office, her head spinning. She didn't know what to think. He was intimidating, yes, but there was something more, a depth she hadn't expected. Little did she know that, for Klaus Richter, this wasn't a job interview. It was an audit of her soul. The relief that the interview was over was quickly replaced by the anxiety of waiting. Aya spent the rest of the day caring for Malik, doing laundry at the shelter's communal facilities, trying to distract herself with simple household chores. Every ring of her old cell phone made her heart leap, but it was just a reminder of a refugee support system or another mother at the shelter. Night fell again, and with it the cold reality. Her small reserve of money, meticulously saved from sporadic odd jobs, was running out. The thought of Malik going hungry was a constant shadow, a monster that whispered in her ears during moments of silence. The next day, she woke up determined. The interview might not amount to anything. She couldn't keep waiting. She put on jeans and a jacket and went out looking for any day job. The sky was heavy, promising more rain. After hours wandering through cafes and shops, receiving polite rejections or simply being ignored, fatigue began to weigh on her. It was then, as she passed through a small park, that she saw a familiar figure sitting on a bench, leaning against a tree. It was Klaus Richter. Aya stopped abruptly, her heart pounding. He was alone, wearing an expensive but simple jacket, and he seemed different. Less a figure of power, more an elderly and weary man. His shoulders, once straight, were slightly hunched. He stared into space, and his expression was one of profound sadness, almost physical pain. Aya hesitated. Approaching her potential employer outside of a professional context seemed like a mistake, an intrusion. But something in his face stopped her. It was the same raw loneliness she saw in the mirror every day, only aged and dressed in a €1,000 suit. He coughed, a dry, hoarse sound, and placed a hand on his chest. And then, Aya saw. In his haste or perhaps distracted, he had dropped his wallet on the ground beside the bench. It was a fine leather wallet, clearly luxurious. Aya's heart raced. This was a sum of money that could change her life and Malik's for months. Maybe even a year. The temptation was a sweet, poisonous whisper. She looked around. No one had seen. He could simply grab it, disappear among the trees. His needs screamed at him, justifying the act. But then, his son's eyes flashed into his mind. The lesson she wanted to teach him wasn't that survival justifies everything. It was that dignity and honesty are the last refuge of those who have lost everything. He took a deep breath, his chest tight with the internal struggle. And then, he made his decision. He approached silently, picked up the wallet. Instead of running away, he lightly touched her shoulder. Klaus Richter jumped, snapping back to reality. His blue eyes, now clouded by a mist of pain, focused on her in surprise. "Mr. Richter," Aya said, her voice trembling slightly. "Your wallet. It fell." She held out the object to him. He looked at the wallet, then at her face. Her expression was one of utter astonishment. He took the wallet, his fingers brushing against hers for a second. "Thank you," he said, his voice weaker than she remembered. He seemed to see something in her, something beyond the refugee woman. "It's you, Aya, isn't it? From the interview." Aya nodded, feeling exposed. "Yes, sir." He opened his mouth to say something, but another coughing fit overcame him, stronger this time. He winced in pain. "Are you all right, sir?" Aya asked instinctively, a reflex of compassion stronger than his discomfort. He shook his head, breathless. Aya saw a small coffee kiosk on the other side of the park. "One moment," she said. Without thinking twice, he ran to the kiosk and, with his last coins, bought a bottle of water. He ran back and handed it to her. "Here. You can help." Klaus Richter took the water, his incredulous eyes fixed on her. He took a sip, then another. He coughed her up a truce. He stared at her, and this time there was no analysis, no judgment. There was only a deep, almost rude astonishment. "Why did you do that?" he asked, his voice rough. Aya shrugged, suddenly ashamed. "It seemed like you needed to." He continued to look at her, and a strange glint appeared in his pale eyes. Aya, not knowing what else to say, recoiled. "I have to go. My son is waiting for me." She turned and started to walk away, feeling his gaze on her back like a physical weight. She had done the right thing, but a cold anxiety settled within her. He was a powerful man, and she had seen him vulnerable. What would this mean for her fragile future? She didn't know that this small act of kindness, this sacrifice of her last coins, was not an end point. It was the first movement of a very complex dance. The hours that followed the meeting in the park dragged on with the stickiness of heavy honey. Aya returned to the shelter, her mind a whirlwind. The image of Klaus Richter's eyes, first lost in pain, then fixed on her with that disturbing intensity, wouldn't leave her. Malik rushed to her, embracing her legs. "Mom, did you get a job?" he asked, his hope a sharp knife in Aya's heart. "Not yet, my love," she whispered, stroking his hair. "But we will." The night was long and almost sleepless. She reviewed every moment of the interview, every word exchanged in the park. Had she offended him by getting close? Had she been too bold in buying him water? Perhaps he saw her compassion as pity, and a man like him would hate to be the object of pity. Fear was a constant companion, a whisper in the shadows of the dark room. The next day dawned gray. No new messages on her phone. Aya tried to maintain the routine, but the uncertainty was poison. She took Malik to the playground near the shelter, watching him swing with a strength she herself no longer felt. The other mothers, some German, others immigrants from other backgrounds, formed their small groups. Aya always sat a little apart, an island of solitude in a sea of companionship. Her story was too heavy, her scars too visible. By late afternoon, hunger began to bite. The shelter's food was scarce and uninspiring. Malik complained of a stomach ache, a childish euphemism for the hunger they both felt. Aya looked at her almost empty purse. The last coins had gone into Klaus Richter's water bottle. A fit of despair overwhelmed her. Had her foolish kindness cost her son his dinner? Guilt was an overwhelming weight. It was then that her cell phone rang. An unknown number. Aya's hands trembled so much that she almost dropped the device. "Hello?" she said, her voice a whisper. "Mrs. Al-Mansuri? This is Mr. Richter's secretary. We would like to invite you for a second interview tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning in his office." Aya felt her legs weaken. "A second interview?" she repeated, incredulous. "Yes." Mr. Richter was very impressed. The line went dead. Aya stared at her mobile phone, a wave of contradictory emotions washing over her. Relief. Renewed hope. But also a strange chill, an apprehension. He was very impressed. Impressed by what? By her qualifications? Or by what happened in the park? Malik tugged at her coat. "Mom, what's wrong? Are you all right?" Aya forced a smile, the brightest she could manage. "Yes, my love. Very well. The man from the job wants to speak with Mom again." Malik let out a little squeal of joy and hugged her. The warmth of her small body was the only real thing in that moment of confusion. That night, Aya couldn't sleep. The second interview. It was a positive sign, undoubtedly. But the memory of the intensity of Klaus Richter's gaze haunted her. He wasn't a simple man. He didn't do anything by chance. What did he really want? She mentally prepared herself, rehearsing answers to more difficult, more technical questions. She tried to push away the strange premonition, the feeling that she was venturing into dangerous territory. He was powerful. She was vulnerable. The lines were very clear. But perhaps, just perhaps, his honesty had truly impressed her. Perhaps there was, behind that steely facade, a trace of humanity. It was in this fragile hope that she clung as the clock ticked slowly, each tick a step towards a future that seemed, more than ever, a crossroads. She donned her armor in black, but felt naked, exposed. He wanted to see her again. And Aya, with her heart pounding, knew that this time, it wouldn't just be an interview. The 22nd floor seemed even quieter that morning. The sound of her footsteps in the hallway was muffled by the thick carpet, creating a sense of unreality. Klaus Richter's secretary smiled at her, a smile that seemed genuine, and announced her arrival over the intercom. Richter's deep voice replied, "Come in." Aya opened the door and found the man seated not behind his large desk, but in a small sitting area with two armchairs facing the panoramic window. He wore a tweed jacket, looking more like a university professor than an industry titan. "Ms. Al-Mansuri, thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." His voice was softer, less formal. Aya sat on the edge of the armchair, her hands clasped in her lap. He observed her silently for a moment, his blue eyes scanning her face. "You know," he began, "I've done many interviews throughout my life. I see hundreds of resumes a year. People with MBAs, with impressive experience." He paused, turning to look out the window. The city stretched out at his feet, a chessboard of possibilities. But it's rare to find character. Aya felt her face flush. He looked at her again. "What you did yesterday in the park, you returned my wallet. And then, you bought me water." He opened a drawer in the side table, and took out a 50-cent coin. "With your last coins, I presume." Aya was speechless. He had noticed. He knew. "Why?" he asked, the same question from the park, but this time laden with a deeper meaning. Aya lowered her gaze to her hands. "Because it was the right thing to do," she whispered. "And because, you seem to need it." Klaus Richter let out a deep sigh, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of his being. "The right thing," he repeated, as if savoring the words. "You know, Mrs. Al-Mansuri, I built an empire based on logic, opportunity, the harsh reality of numbers. Doing the right thing is often a luxury we can't afford in business." He paused, his face darkening. 30 years ago, I lost my only daughter. She was your age. A car accident." Aya felt a lump in her throat. The pain in his voice was palpable, a wound that had never healed. "My wife never got over it. She passed away 10 years ago. Since then, this company, this power, has been my refuge. My prison." He looked directly at Aya, his eyes gleaming. "When you returned my wallet, I wasn't testing it. I was sinking. My physical pain, an old angina, was a mirror of a much deeper pain. And you, a stranger, a refugee who has every reason to think only of yourself, did the right thing. He stood up and walked to the window. I didn't call you here for a second interview for the administrative assistant position. Aya held her breath. This was what she feared. What did he want then? Something inappropriate? Something that would tarnish her dignity? Fear chilled her veins. He turned to her and saw the panic on her face. A sad smile crossed his lips. It's not what you're thinking, my dear. I'm not a monster. He picked up an envelope from the table and handed it to her. Open it. With trembling hands, Aya opened the envelope. Inside was a check. She looked at the amount, and the world stopped. It was an amount she couldn't even comprehend. Zeros stretching like a dream. It was enough for an apartment, for Malik's education, for a lifetime of security. I can't accept this, she whispered, shocked. It's a gift, said Klaus Richter, his voice firm. Thank you. But that's not all. He sat down again, his posture serious. I want to offer you a job. A real one. Not as an assistant. I want you to be my personal assistant. I want you to help me manage my charitable foundation, the Richter Hoffnung Stiftung, the Hope Foundation. We will work with refugees, with people like you. People who did the right thing when nobody was watching. Aya looked at the check, then at the face of that powerful, broken man. It wasn't charity. It was recognition. It was an opportunity to use her own pain as a ladder to help others. The tears she had held back for so long began to flow freely down her face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of a relief so profound it made her tremble. Klaus Richter watched her, and for the first time, a genuine tender smile lit up his stern face. Welcome, Aya. Your new life begins today. The silence in the office was thick, broken only by the muffled sound of the traffic below, and the panting rhythm of Aya's breathing. She held the check as if it were a sacred relic, her fingers trembling against the paper. The amount was astronomical, but it wasn't the money that left her breathless. It was the meaning behind it. It was the bridge being built over the abyss of her despair. I don't know what to say, she managed to articulate, tears streaming down her face and wetting the collar of her blouse. Klaus Richter watched her, his expression no longer that of the ruthless CEO, but that of a man who had found a fragment of redemption. Say yes, he replied, his voice soft. It's a legitimate job offer. There will be a contract, a salary, a fair salary, plus this advance. You'll report directly to me. The foundation needs someone with your perspective, with your empathy. Someone who hasn't forgotten what it's like to fight. The word empathy echoed in Aya's mind. It was the same quality that had drawn her to him in the park. The same one that had made her spend her last coins. Now that same characteristic was being valued, being transformed into a career. It was a turnaround that her mind, shaped by adversity, could barely process. And my son Malik, she whispered, her biggest concern always on the surface. The schedule. Klaus nodded, a gesture of understanding. He'll have flexibility. There will be a top-quality nursery in the building, subsidized by the company. I want you to focus on the work, not worry about your son's well-being. It was more than she had ever dreamed of. Security. Respect. The possibility of caring for her son while building a life. She looked at Klaus's face, at the deep furrows that pain and power had carved, and saw in him not a distant benefactor, but an ally. A man who, in a strange way, was as lonely as she was. Yes, said Aya, her voice firm and clear despite the tears. Yes, I accept. Thank you, Mr. Richter. Thank you. He nodded, a glint of satisfaction in his pale eyes. Call me Klaus, please. We'll be a team. He pressed a button on his intercom. Helga, please prepare the documents for Mrs. Al-Mansouri. And call the lawyer. The following hours passed like a dream. She signed contracts, filled out forms, had a quick meeting with the human resources director, who treated her with a respect that made her feel, for the first time in years, a valued professional. Klaus showed her new workspace, an office adjacent to his, with a stunning view. Your first task, he said, is to go home, to your new home, and tell Malik the good news. Tomorrow, Helga will help you find an apartment. Everything will be handled by the company. New home. The words sounded like a melody. When Aya left the Richter Holdings building, the daylight seemed different. Warmer, more hopeful. She didn't take the bus. She walked, feeling the sun on her face, each step a celebration. The people on the street no longer seemed like distant strangers. They seemed part of the same world to which she now belonged. She went into a small pastry shop and, with a note from the little money she still had, bought 2 chocolate cakes. A simple act, but one that symbolized a newfound freedom. The freedom to treat her son without fear of tomorrow. On her way to the shelter, her cell phone rang. It was the social worker. Mrs. Al-Mansouri, we have some rather strange news. We received a call from Richter Holdings. They said you no longer need your place in the shelter. That everything is settled. What's going on? Aya smiled, a wide, genuine smile that lit up her whole face. Everything's fine, Mrs. Weber. Everything's fine. It's a miracle. On the other end of the line, the woman was silent for a moment. Well, congratulations then. As she hung up, Aya felt the weight of years lift from her shoulders. She ran the last few meters to the shelter, her heart pounding with pure joy. Her story of suffering hadn't ended, but it had turned a decisive page. And she could hardly wait to write the next chapter, alongside her son who had kept her hope alive. Malik was sitting on the bedroom floor, playing with a worn-out plastic toy car, when Aya entered. Her face was so radiant that the child stopped immediately, his big brown eyes wide with curiosity. "Mommy? You're glowing," he exclaimed. Aya laughed, a light, musical sound she hadn't made in a long time. She knelt down and hugged him tightly, making him protest with an, "Ouch, Mommy." "Malik, my love, do you remember the man from the job?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. He nodded, serious. "Mr. Klaus gave me a wonderful job. And he gave us a present. We're going to have our own house. With a real kitchen and a living room, and a bedroom just for you." Malik's expression changed from curiosity to utter astonishment. "Really? A real house? Without other people making noise?" "Without other people making noise," Aya confirmed, kissing his forehead. "And look, I brought you a cake." She handed him the package, and Malik's eyes lit up like 2 stars. While he devoured the chocolate, Aya began packing her bags. It wasn't much. Some clothes, a couple of crumpled photographs, Malik's drawings, his precious documents. Each object told a story of survival, but now they seemed like relics from a distant past. She had barely closed the old suitcase when a discreet but elegant car stopped in front of the shelter. Helga, Klaus's secretary, got out of the vehicle. "Mrs. Al-Mansouri? Mr. Richter asked me to take you to see some apartments. And in the meantime, he reserved a room for you and your son in a hotel until you make your choice." Aya felt a new surge of gratitude. He had thought of everything. The car ride was a revelation. Helga, who was surprisingly warm, explained the details of the job, the benefits, the company culture. It was a new world, a world of possibilities. They visited 3 apartments. The first was modern but impersonal. The second was a little dark. The third was in a quiet neighborhood, with a small tree-lined square in front. It was a first-floor apartment with 3 rooms, a fully equipped kitchen, and a bedroom for Malik overlooking a tree. The late afternoon light streamed through the windows, painting the walls a warm golden hue. Aya looked at Malik, who was running down the hallway laughing. "This is it," she said without a shadow of a doubt. "We want this one." Helga smiled. "Excellent choice. The paperwork will be taken care of. You can move in tomorrow." The night at the hotel was the first of many new experiences. A long, hot bath in a clean tub. A soft, enormous bed. Room service. Malik jumped on the bed, euphoric, unable to contain his happiness. "Mom, are we rich?" he asked suddenly. Aya sat on the edge of the bed and pulled him onto her lap. "We're not rich, my love. We're blessed. And we have a responsibility to be good, to help others, just as Mr. Klaus helped us." He yawned, snuggling against her. "I like Mr. Klaus." Aya smiled, stroking his hair. Me too. As Malik fell asleep, Aya gazed out the hotel window at the gleaming city. Less than 48 hours ago, she had been drenched and hopeless. Now, she had a job, a home, a future. Kindness had been her investment, and the return had been exponential. But a small part of her, the part she had learned to distrust, still whispered. Why? Why would a man like Klaus Richter do all this? Was it just gratitude? Or was there something more? She stifled her voice. That night, she chose to believe in kindness. She chose to believe that her insignificant act in the park had touched a heart that everyone considered to be made of stone. She fell asleep with a smile on her lips, the first of many, feeling the warmth of her son beside her, and the gentle weight of a future full of promise. The following weeks solidified Aya's new reality. She adapted to her work with a dedication that impressed the entire foundation team. Her practical perspective, shaped by direct experience, proved invaluable. She identified flaws in bureaucratic processes that dehumanized asylum seekers and suggested changes that Klaus implemented immediately. Her relationship with him was professional, but there was an underlying current of complicity and affection. He always asked about Malik, and sometimes, at the end of the day, she would show him the boy's drawings. A rare but genuine smile would light up Klaus's stern face. However, a small seed of unease began to germinate deep in Aya's heart. It was all too perfect. Klaus's generosity was overwhelming. One day, he gifted Malik an expensive construction set for no apparent reason. On another occasion, he insisted that Aya use her private health insurance for a complete checkup, paid for by the company. Aya was grateful, but an inner voice warned her. What did he want in return? Her distrust, forged in the furnace of betrayal and chaos, couldn't accept pure kindness. Did he, deep down, expect something from her that she wasn't willing to give? A sense of obligation began to weigh on her. She worked overtime, pushing herself to the limit, not just out of gratitude, but almost out of fear of disappointing him, of breaking the spell. One afternoon, during a meeting, she proposed a bold idea for a fundraising event. One of the older directors, a man named Schmidt, vehemently opposed it, calling the idea naive and unprofessional. Aya shrank back, feeling exposed. But then, Klaus intervened, his voice sharp as a knife. Naivete, Schmidt, is sometimes the only lens that can see beyond sterile cynicism. Aya's idea is excellent. Let's implement it. The room was completely silent. Schmidt blushed, but remained silent. Aya felt a wave of relief and loyalty towards Klaus, but also a tremor of fear. His power was absolute, and he was using it to protect her. What would happen if she ever disappointed him? Her anxiety peaked when, one Saturday, Klaus invited her to lunch with him and Malik. It wasn't a business meeting, it was a personal invitation. The lunch was pleasant, in a quiet restaurant. Klaus seemed relaxed, asking Malik questions about school and his friends. Malik, in turn, loved the attention. "Grandpa Klaus, are you coming to our school party?" The boy asked innocently. Klaus was surprised and then played. "If your mother invites me, I'd be delighted." Aya forced a smile. In that moment, she clearly saw the web of affection that was forming. It was genuine, yes, but it was also deep and complex. She was letting a powerful and emotionally needy man into her son's heart. What if something went wrong? That night, after Malik fell asleep, Aya sat in her silent room and faced her fear. She was afraid of trading one dependency for another. The dependency on charity for shelter had been obvious. The dependency on Klaus's kindness was more subtle, but perhaps more dangerous. She loved her job, she loved her new life, but she needed to know if it was real, or just a whim of a rich man that could one day end. Her hard-won dignity demanded clarity. She couldn't live in the shadow of doubt. She had to confront Klaus. Aya arranged a meeting with Klaus for the following morning. This time, it wasn't him who called her, it was she who asked to speak with him. She entered his office with her heart pounding, but with steely determination. Klaus was at his desk, reading a report. He looked up and, seeing her serious expression, put down his glasses. "Aya, is everything all right?" "Malik is fine," she said, sitting down. "It's about us." He remained silent, observing her, giving her space to speak. Klaus, what you've done for me and my son. There are no words to thank you. You gave us a life. But I need to understand. Why? She looked directly into his eyes, her vulnerability exposed, but her strength intact. Is it just gratitude for me returning your wallet? Is it pity? Or is there something more you expect from me? Something I'm not seeing. Her words hung in the air between them. Klaus didn't seem angry or offended. On the contrary, a deep, weary sigh escaped his chest. He stood and went to the window, as was his habit when emotions ran high. For years, I lived in a fortress. Money was my walls, power my drawbridge. And inside, there was only an echo. The echo of my daughter, Lena. His voice was a hoarse whisper. When I lost her, I lost my humanity. I became that figure you saw in the first interview. A man who only saw numbers, strategies, profit. My pain was toxic fuel. He turned to her, his blue eyes gleaming with raw honesty. And then, you appeared. You didn't just return a wallet. You saw me. You didn't see the tycoon Klaus Richter. You saw an old sick man, sitting on a bench, sinking into his own sadness. And instead of running away, or taking advantage, you did the right thing. The human thing. He took a step toward her. You owe me nothing, Aya. Absolutely nothing. This job, this house, they're not a payment. They're an investment. An investment in what I've come to believe in again because of you. Kindness. The foundation isn't a hobby for me now. It's my legacy. And I need you to help me build it, not out of pity, but because you're the most competent and ethical person I've met in decades. He stopped in front of his desk and pointed to the photograph of his daughter. Lena would have loved you. She would have loved Malik. By helping them, in a way that may be selfish, I'm honoring her memory. I'm creating a new family, not of blood, but of choice. Of spirit. Tears streamed freely down Aya's face. They weren't tears of fear or obligatory gratitude. They were tears of understanding. She finally saw. He wasn't a distant benefactor or a predator. He was a man who, through her, had found his way back to his own humanity. Her kindness had been the key that had unlocked her own cell. I understand, she whispered. And I feel the same. Malik, he already sees you as family. Klaus smiled, a smile that reached his eyes, erasing years of loneliness. So, can we stop this drama? Can we just be? Work together? Take care of each other as friends? As family? Aya nodded, an immense weight lifting from her chest. Yes. We can. In that moment, the last shadow of doubt dissipated. Aya realized that her journey wasn't about receiving charity. It was about a genuine exchange. She had given Klaus the hope of a tomorrow. And he had given her the tomorrow itself. The positive twist wasn't the money or the job. It was the restoration of faith in human connection. She left Klaus's office not as a servant, but as a partner. As a friend. And she knew, with absolute certainty, that her life and her son's would not only be safe. They would finally and truly be happy. The story of the Libyan refugee and the powerful German man was not a story of rescue. It was a story of mutual salvation. And it was only the beginning.